My sister's boot collided with my 7-month bump, and the world dissolved into white pain. Gasping on the restaurant floor, I searched for my husband through the agony, but Miles did not rush to hold me. Instead, the federal judge stood perfectly still, his eyes scanning the ceiling until they locked onto a security camera. He looked at the lens, then down at me, not with concern, but with the cold calculation of a man checking if the frame was in focus. My name is Evelyn Hart, and at 29 years old, I had learned that safety was often just an expensive illusion. The air inside the marrow room tasted of aged steak and old money, a scent that usually comforted the elite of Havenport, Maryland, but tonight it made bile rise in my throat. I shifted in my chair, my hand resting instinctively on the swell of my belly. I was 7 months pregnant, and my back ached with a dull, persistent throb that I had been trying to ignore for the sake of appearances. My sister, Brielle, stood across from me. Her smile was too bright, her eyes too wide. Without a single word of warning, she lunged. It happened fast, yet my mind recorded it frame by frame. Brielle did not stumble. She did not trip. She swung her leg back and drove the heel of her designer boot straight into my stomach. The impact was a dull, wet thud that vibrated through my entire skeleton. I did not scream because I could not find the breath to do so. I folded over the table, scattering silverware, as the world dissolved into a high-pitched ringing. My hands clawed at the tablecloth, desperate to protect the life inside me, but my body was paralyzed by the shock. Through the haze of agony, I turned my head, searching for the one person sworn to protect me. "Miles!" I gasped, the name scraping against my throat. My husband, the Honorable Judge Miles Keaton, stood 6 feet away. He did not rush to catch me. He did not drop to his knees. He stood perfectly still, his tailored suit unruffled. I watched, terrified, as his eyes bypassed my writhing form and scanned the ceiling. He was tracing the crown molding. He stopped only when his gaze locked onto the blinking red light of a security dome in the corner. He stared at it for a second, verifying the angle, before his face shifted into a mask of professional concern. Nobody move," Miles commanded, his voice booming with the authority of a federal courtroom. He stepped between me and the gawking diners, holding up a hand. "Manager, secure this area immediately. I want absolutely no press. Do you understand me? No cameras." He was not managing a medical emergency. He was managing a crime scene. Brielle was still screaming, but she was not apologizing. She was pointing a shaking finger at me, her face twisted in a performance of outrage. "She's doing this on purpose!" Brielle shrieked, looking wildly around the room at the stunned witnesses. "Look at her. She's manipulating you." "Miles, it's all a sick game to her. She wants to ruin us." The accusation hung heavy in the air. I saw doubt creep into the eyes of the couple at the next table. They looked at me not as a victim, but as a hysteric causing a scene. Paramedics arrived in a blur of blue uniforms and static voices. They lifted me onto a stretcher. As they strapped me in, the pain began to recede into a cold numbness. I drifted in and out of consciousness, but I felt a hand brush against my shoulder. It was Miles. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. I thought he was going to whisper that he loved me. Instead, I felt the heavy weight of paper sliding into my open purse. I heard the distinct, sharp sound of a zipper being pulled shut. "Rest now, Evelyn," he said, his voice void of warmth. At the hospital, the sterile lights burned my eyes. The rhythmic whoosh of the ultrasound machine was the only sound that mattered. "The heartbeat is strong," the doctor said, wiping the gel from my stomach. "You were lucky, Mrs. Keaton, very lucky. But given the The nature of the trauma. We need to keep you for observation. I nodded, unable to speak. When the room finally cleared, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was a text message from an unknown number. Sign it, to keep things quiet. My blood ran cold. I reached for my purse, which sat on the chair where Miles had left it. I unzipped the main compartment and my fingers brushed against the thick manila envelope he had planted on me. I pulled it out. The legal jargon on the cover page was dense, but the title in the center was bold and unmistakable. Petition Emergency Conservatorship. I looked at the name of the petitioner. It was not a medical professional. It was not a concerned parent. It was Miles Keaton. My husband did not want to save our baby. He wanted to own me. I learned early that silence was not peace. It was usually the calm before a fist hit a wall. Growing up in a rusted-out town in Pennsylvania, in a house held together by bad debt and shouting matches, I survived by becoming invisible. I did not hide in closets. I hid in plain sight, watching, listening, and remembering. If my father came home with a stumble in his step at 6 p.m, I knew to disappear by 6:15. I turned survival into a skill set, noting every shift in the atmosphere, every micro-expression that signaled danger. That skill set brought me to Gray Line Integrity Services. My official title was Risk Control Specialist, but in reality, I was a professional paranoid. I spent my days combing through corporate contracts, tracking cash flows that vanished into shell companies, and flagging system access logs that did not add up. I was excellent at my job because I understood a fundamental truth about human nature: people lie, but patterns do not. I could look at a spreadsheet and see a betrayal hidden in a decimal point. When I met Miles 3 years ago, he felt like the antidote to my chaotic history. He was a federal judge, a man of law, order, and absolute predictability. He drove a sensible sedan, wore suits that were expensive but never flashy, and told me on our third date that he wanted a life that was clean and quiet. I fell in love with the stability. I thought I had finally found solid ground where I did not have to watch the exits. Then there was Brielle. My sister was the sun to my shadow, loud, bright, and burning everything she touched. She had a history of pranks that bordered on cruelty, like telling me I was adopted on my 10th birthday or hiding my acceptance letters to college for a full week. But she had never been violent. She was chaotic, yes, but physical aggression was never her weapon of choice. She preferred humiliation. The ground began to shift the moment the second blue line appeared on the pregnancy test 7 months ago. Miles did not cry with joy. He nodded, as if approving a motion in court. His schedule, once predictable, became a fortress I could not breach. He started staying late at the courthouse, and when he was home, he spoke about our lives in strange, detached terms. He talked about family image and legacy as if he were running for office, not preparing to change diapers. "You need to stop working. Evie," he had said one night over a dinner I had cooked, it is too much stress for the baby. I need you focused on the home. I need you available." It did not sound like an offer of support. It sounded like a sentencing. Then Brielle moved to Havenport 2 months ago. She claimed she was here temporarily to help me with the nursery, but she spent more time at country club mixers than assembling cribs. I noticed she was suddenly very friendly with the wives of Miles's political donors. It was jarring to see my chaotic, free-spirited sister blend so seamlessly into my husband's rigid, conservative world. They whispered in corners at parties, their heads close together, breaking apart the moment I walked near. The red flags were small at first, just paper cuts. Miles began sliding documents across the breakfast table alongside my decaf coffee. "Just standard maternity insurance forms," he would say, tapping the signature line with his pen. "And a medical power of attorney, just in case. You know, in case something happens during delivery. I need to be able to make decisions for you." I signed them. I signed them because I was tired, because my ankles were swollen, and because I trusted the man who shared my bed. I did not read the fine print. I did not check the dates, but the risk analyst in me woke up before I did. 2 weeks ago, I started noticing the silence in the house felt heavy, like the air before a storm in Pennsylvania. I started tracking things, not officially, but instinctively. I noted when Miles's phone screen faced down on the table. I noted the hushed conversations that stopped dead when I entered the room. I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that for the first time in my life, I was not the one doing the investigating. I was the one being audited. The rot in my marriage did not start with a kick. It started with champagne and soft cheese at the home of Arthur Sterling, Miles's political godfather. The dinner party 3 weeks ago was less of a social gathering and more of a deposition. I sat between a state senator and a venture capitalist, feeling like a piece of livestock being appraised for market value. They asked questions that sounded polite on the surface but were razor-sharp underneath, probing about my inheritance, my property deeds in Pennsylvania, and exactly whose name was on the deed to our house in Havenport, a man named Cole, a political strategist with teeth that looked too white to be real, clapped Miles on the shoulder. "You are a future ladder." "Miles," Cole said, his eyes sliding over to me with a look that made my skin crawl. "But remember, in this town, family is an asset. Don't let it become a liability." I stiffened, waiting for Miles to defend me, to say that his wife was not a line item on a balance sheet. Instead, Miles just nodded, swirling his Pinot Noir. "Risk management is my specialty." "Cole," Miles replied smoothly. That was the night Brielle began her performance. She held court at the other end of the table, her laughter tinkling like broken glass. I heard her whispering to the senator's wife, her voice lowered just enough to invite intimacy, but loud enough for me to hear. "Oh, Evelyn is just struggling a bit right now," Brielle said, feigning a sad smile. "She is so sensitive lately. The doctors think it might be prenatal anxiety, or maybe something deeper. We are all just walking on eggshells." I wanted to stand up and scream that I was fine, that I was the most rational person in the room, but I knew that an outburst would only prove her point. In the days that followed, the walls began to close in. Miles started pruning my life like it was an overgrown hedge. My best friend, Sarah, who had known me since my broke days in Philadelphia, was the first to go. "She is too loud." "Evelyn," Miles told me as he deleted her number from the guest list for his fundraiser. "She does not fit the profile of a federal judge's wife. We need to surround ourselves with quality people." I was being isolated, cut off from anyone who knew me before I became Mrs. Keaton. The isolation made me sharper, more observant. My training at Grayline kicked in. I stopped asking questions and started auditing. I logged into our joint bank account last Tuesday. The balance was fine, but the correspondence address had been altered. Instead of our home address on Sycamore Lane, the statements were being routed to a post office box in a town 20 miles away. When I confronted Miles, he did not even look up from his legal briefs. "Oh, honey," he chuckled, a sound that lacked all humor. "You are having pregnant brain again. We changed that months ago for security reasons. You really are becoming forgetful." I knew I had not forgotten. I never forgot data. Then came Brielle. She cornered me in the kitchen while I was making tea, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for dust. "Evie," she said, her voice dripping with fake sisterly concern, "you look exhausted. You should really let Miles handle the finances. By the way, do you still use that old password for your encrypted data vault? The one with the special characters?" I froze. My data vault contained the backups of my entire life, my birth certificate, my prenuptial agreement, and the deed to the land my grandmother left me. I had never told Brielle about it. Why would you ask that I asked, keeping my voice steady? Just curious. She shrugged. but her eyes were hard, just thinking about protecting your assets. That was the moment I knew. She was not here to help me with the baby. She was here to loot the burning building. Later that night, I passed by Miles's study. The heavy oak door was cracked open an inch. I paused, holding my breath. Yes, I understand the timeline. Miles was saying into the phone, his voice low and urgent. But is the conservatorship package ready? I need the medical exhibits to look airtight. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was not ordering a gift. He was ordering my cage. I waited until the nurse left the room before I opened the envelope again. My hands were steady now, steadied by the cold, familiar rhythm of crisis management. I skipped the legal preamble and went straight to the appendices. It was worse than I thought. Annex B granted Miles full power of attorney not just over our joint accounts, but over my personal trust from my grandmother. Annex C gave him the authority to make all medical decisions on my behalf. Annex D was the clincher. It granted the conservator the right to determine the residence and confinement of the ward. He was not just trying to take my money, he was trying to legalize my imprisonment. Then I found the smoking gun. Tucked in the back was a document titled Psychological Evaluation, signed by a Dr. Eris Thorne. It detailed a history of paranoia, manic episodes, and self-harm. I read the date of the evaluation. It was dated 3 days ago. I had never met a Dr. Eris Thorne in my life. I reached for my laptop, which Miles had surprisingly brought to the hospital, likely to keep up the appearance of a supportive spouse letting his wife watch movies. I did not open Netflix. I opened the incognito browser and logged into the Greyline Integrity Services remote portal. If they were coming for me this hard, there had to be a financial trigger. I searched the client database for anything related to Havenport infrastructure. A file popped up, Havenport Harbor Redevelopment. It was a massive project, valued at over $400 million. I clicked on the vendor list. The primary logistics contractor was a shell company called Redstone LLC. I knew that name. It was the holding company for the political strategist who had called Miles a future ladder at the dinner party. I dug deeper into the access logs for the Redstone file. My breath hitched. According to the system, user Evelyn Hart had accessed the risk assessment report and marked it as approved last Tuesday at 10:30 in the morning. That is impossible, I whispered to the empty room. Last Tuesday at 10:30. I was strapped to a monitor getting a non-stress test for the baby. I was nowhere near a computer. I ran a trace on the IP address that had been used to log in with my credentials. It was not a residential address, and it wasn't a coffee shop. The IP block belonged to the federal government, specifically the secure internal network of the United States District Court. Miles had used his chambers to log in as me, approve a corrupt deal for his friends, and was now trying to lock me away so I could never testify that I didn't sign off on it. I immediately initiated a full backup. I encrypted the logs, the IP trace, and the fake medical report, sending everything to a secure server I maintained for nuclear scenarios. Then, I opened a spreadsheet and began building a timeline, minute by minute, cross-referencing my medical appointments with the fraudulent logins. The door creaked open. I slammed the laptop shut just as Brielle walked in, carrying a cup of coffee. She looked tired, but her eyes were alert. "You know, Evie," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "This reminds me of sophomore year. Remember when you cracked? During finals, you were so convinced the professors were plotting against you." She was rewriting history. I had not cracked. I had mononucleosis. But she was planting the seed for the nurses outside to hear. I had a fever of 102. "Brielle," I said calmly. "See?" she sighed, shaking her head. Always defensive. You need to rest." Miles entered a moment later, carrying a bouquet of lilies. He looked the picture of the doting husband. He kissed my forehead. his lips dry and cool. "I spoke to the doctors," he said softly. "So they think you can go home tomorrow, but we need to make sure you are protected. I have the papers here. Evelyn, just sign the petition. It is just temporary. Just until the baby comes." I don't know. Miles," I said, putting a tremor in my voice that I didn't feel. "I feel so confused." "It is for the best," he urged, pushing the pen into my hand. "Just one signature." I looked at him, then at the laptop on the nightstand. I decided to test the perimeter. "Miles," I said, lowering my voice, "I am worried about work. I have a copy of the harbor contract on my hard drive. If I go on medical leave, will they find it?" His eyes snapped to the laptop. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a hunger that had nothing to do with love. "You have a copy?" he asked, his voice tight. "On that machine?" "Yes," I lied. "I downloaded it to double-check the numbers." "I can take care of that for you," he said quickly, reaching for the computer. "I will. Wipe it clean so you do not have to worry." He had taken the bait. Now I knew exactly what he was afraid of. I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, forcing my mind to rewind the events at the Marrow Room. I played the memory back like security footage, frame by frame, stripping away the pain and the shock to look at the mechanics of the moment. I saw Brielle approach the table. I saw her leg pull back, but then I saw the detail I had missed in the chaos. Just a split second before her boot moved, Brielle's eyes had darted to the right. She had looked directly at Miles. He had given a barely perceptible nod, a dip of the chin so slight it could have been a swallow. The kick had not been a loss of control. It was a transaction. I picked up my phone and dialed Nate Caldwell. Nate was a ghost in the machine, a cybersecurity engineer who owed me his career after I cleared him of a false embezzlement charge 3 years ago. "Evelyn." His voice was rough with sleep. "It is 3 in the morning. I need you to run a forensic check on a document," I said, my voice steady. "And I need you to pull the security feed from the hallway outside room 304 at St. Jude's Hospital. Use the backdoor access we found during the audit last year." 10 minutes later, my phone pinged with a video file. I watched on the small screen. The timestamp showed the footage was from 3 hours ago. I saw the paramedics wheeling me in. Then I saw Miles. He lingered in the corridor while the nurses were distracted. He looked left, then right, before sliding his hand into my open purse on the gurney. He didn't take anything out. He put the envelope in. "I got the metadata on the psych report," Nate said, his voice now wide awake and grim. "It claims to be from a Dr. Thorne, but the author tag in the XML data is M. Keaton, Fed Judiciary, and Evelyn. It was created 4 days ago. He wrote the evaluation before the incident even happened." I felt a cold clarity wash over me. The kick was never intended to hurt the baby. It was a piece of theater designed to create a public spectacle. They needed a police report, a hospital admission, and witnesses saying I was involved in a violent altercation. It was the physical evidence they needed to fast-track an emergency conservatorship. I looked at the petition again. The petitioner listed was not Miles. It was an entity called Harborwell Family Advocacy. "Harborwell," I whispered. "It is a shell. It keeps his name off the public docket until the judge signs the order." My phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call from a number I dreaded seeing at this hour. Human Resources at Grayline Integrity Services. "Evelyn," the director of HR said, her tone icy. "We have detected a massive data breach involving the Havenport Harbor project. The logs show the files were transferred to an external drive using your credentials. Effective immediately, your access is suspended pending an investigation. We may have to involve the authorities." I almost laughed. It was a pincer movement. Miles was using the conservatorship to strip me of my rights. and simultaneously destroying my professional credibility so that even if I spoke out, I would look like a disgruntled, unstable employee caught stealing corporate secrets. A text message popped up from Brielle. "Don't fight Miles. He is saving you from yourself. Just sign it and go to the facility. You need help. Evie." They expected me to hide. They expected the shame and the fear to drive me into the hole they had dug. They thought they were dealing with Evelyn the sister, or Evelyn the wife. They forgot they were dealing with Evelyn the risk control specialist. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The pain in my stomach was sharp, but the anger was sharper. I was not going to run. I was going to walk right into the lion's den. "Nate," I said into the phone, standing up and reaching for my coat. "Do not delete those logs. I am going to the courthouse." "Now," Nate asked, sounding panicked. "Evelyn, the hearing is in 5 hours. You are supposed to be in a hospital bed." "No," I said, zipping up my boots. "I am supposed to be the defendant. If they want a crazy woman, I will show them exactly what it looks like when I stop following the script." I pulled the scanned PDF of the supplemental maternity rider from my encrypted cloud backup. It looked innocent enough. Standard boilerplate about liability, until I zoomed in on paragraph 42. Subsection C. The font was size 8, barely legible. It stated that in the event of suspected acute psychological distress, all independent financial authority of the signee would be immediately suspended and transferred to the spouse. It was a trigger clause. All they needed was the distress. That was why Brielle had kicked me. She was not acting out of anger. She was pressing the start button on a machine they had built months ago. I kept digging. I found a wire transfer for $5,000 sent yesterday from our joint account. It was labeled medical deposit, but the routing number led to a property management firm in rural North Dakota. I looked up the address. It was a long-term assisted living facility with barred windows and a policy that restricted residents from possessing communication devices. Miles was not planning to treat me. He was planning to ship me 1,500 miles away where I would be a ghost. My phone vibrated. It was Nate. "There is a hardware ID in your system logs." "Evelyn," Nate said, his voice tight with excitement. "A physical USB token was inserted into your laptop at 4 in the afternoon on Tuesday. It is a key-secure unit. The same model issued to federal magistrates for remote warrant authorization. That is how the client file got onto your drive. Someone physically plugged in the key to bypass the firewall." I closed my eyes. The memory of Tuesday washing over me. I had been cooking dinner. Brielle had come into the kitchen, holding her phone. "Evie," she had said, looking frantic. "My battery is dead and I need to call Mom. Can I borrow your laptop charger, the one in your bag?" I had pointed to my bag on the counter. She had rummaged in it for 2 minutes. She wasn't looking for a charger. She was plugging in Miles's judicial security token to frame me for corporate espionage. "It was Brielle," I said, my voice cold. "She planted it." I switched tabs to the offline backup I had made of the Havenport Harbor project. I ran the vendor names through a deep web screener I used for high-risk audits. I confirmed that Redstone LLC and another firm called Blue Creek Logistics had no employees, no physical offices, and no equipment. They were ghost ships. The $400 million for the harbor redevelopment was not going to construction. It was flowing into these shells and disappearing offshore. Miles was using his judicial influence to dismiss regulatory injunctions against the project, ensuring the money kept flowing. In exchange, he was getting a cut, and he needed a scapegoat in case Grayline ever looked too closely. That scapegoat was me. But why would Brielle help him destroy her own sister? I opened a new search window and ran a credit check on her, bypassing the standard consumer blocks. The results were a wall of red ink. Brielle was not just a free spirit, she was drowning. She owed $80,000 to a casino in Atlantic City and another $50,000 to a private lender with a history of violence. Miles had not just invited her to town. He had purchased her. He paid her debts, and in return, she delivered the kick that would end my life. Then I found the draft email. It was in a hidden folder on Miles's synchronized tablet, which he had foolishly left logged in on our home network. It was addressed to his lawyer. The subject line was blank. The body contained only one sentence. If she's declared unfit, custody becomes clean. He did not just want the money, he wanted the baby. He wanted to erase me completely, locking me in a facility in North Dakota while he played the grieving father and raised my child on blood money. Evelyn, Nate asked, do we release the logs to the police? We can stop this right now. No, I said, staring at the screen. If we go to the police now, Miles will call in favors. He will bury the evidence and say I hacked him. We need them to commit to the lie. I looked at the time. The hearing was at 9 o'clock in the morning. I am going to the hearing, Nate, I said. I need you to send everything to Eleanor Voss. We are going to turn that courtroom into an audit. You are going to let them put Brielle on the stand, Nate asked. She will lie. She will destroy you. She will try, I said. But Brielle is not a soldier. She is a desperate woman with a gambling addiction. I do not need to destroy her. I just need to make her verify the math. I dialed Eleanor Voss at 4 in the morning. She was not a lawyer you found on a billboard. She was the kind of attorney you hired when you wanted to burn a corporation to the ground using their own bylaws. I sent her the encrypted link to my timeline and the server logs before she even said hello. This is not a divorce case, Ms. Voss, I said when she answered, her voice raspy but alert. This is a whistleblower complaint wrapped in a custody battle. I see the logs. Evelyn, Eleanor said, the sound of typing clicking furiously in the background. But you need to understand the battlefield. Miles is a federal judge. He eats breakfast with the people who sign subpoenas. If we walk into that hearing with just a sob story, he will call a recess, call a favor, and have you committed before lunch. We need a shield before we can use the sword. I don't need a shield, I replied, staring at the darkened hospital parking lot. I need a witness who carries a badge. Eleanor met me an hour later at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. She was not alone. Sitting in the booth with her was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He wore a faded tactical jacket, and his eyes scanned the perimeter of the parking lot before settling on me. This is Deputy U.S. Marshal Rowan Pike, Eleanor said, sliding a coffee across the table. He used to run security for the federal courthouse. He requested a transfer 6 months ago. Rowan looked at the drive, then at me. I didn't request a transfer. Rowan corrected, his voice low and gravelly. I was pushed out because I started asking why search warrants were vanishing from the system. Rumors are that your husband has a habit of editing timestamps on sealed orders. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. It contained the proof of the unauthorized access token. He didn't just edit timestamps, I said, placing the drive on the Formica table. He used a judicial security token to plant corporate espionage files on my personal laptop. The IP address traces back to his chambers. If you run this against the court's access logs, it will match. Rowan looked at the drive, then at me. If I take this, Rowan said slowly, it becomes federal evidence. Once I log it, nobody can bury it, not even Miles. But it means you are effectively declaring war on a sitting judge. He kicked my baby, I said, my voice trembling with a rage I could no longer suppress. He just used my sister's foot to do it. Take the drive. Rowan pocketed the drive. I will be at the hearing. If anyone tries to drag you out for a mandatory medical evaluation before you testify, they will have to go through a U.S. Marshal. We spent the next 3 hours turning the diner booth into a war room. I did not prepare a victim impact statement. I prepared an audit report. I organized the evidence into columns: objective, scope, findings, and chain of custody. I treated my marriage like a failing subsidiary that needed to be liquidated. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red, my phone rang. It was Brielle. I almost didn't answer, but I needed to hear the fear in her voice. I needed to know the enemy was breaking. "Evie," Brielle sounded breathless, like she had been running. "Evie, where are you?" "Mom is calling me. She says the police are asking questions. You have to stop this. They will arrest me. Evie." For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to braid my hair. But then I remembered the boot and the look she shared with Miles. "You should be worried," I said, my voice flat. "I didn't mean to," she sobbed, her composure shattering completely. "He told me it would just be a bruise. He said if I didn't do it, those men would come for me about the debt." I had no choice. "You always have a choice," I said. "You chose to hurt me. You chose to sell me out." "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Tell me what to do. I am so scared." I paused for exactly 5 seconds, letting the silence stretch until it was tight enough to snap. "If you want to live through this," I said, "then you walk into that courtroom and you tell the truth. Not his version, yours. Because I have the logs. Brielle, I know about the token. If you lie on the stand, you are going to prison for perjury and conspiracy. If you tell the truth, maybe you just get probation." I hung up before she could answer. Eleanor checked her watch. "It is time," she said. "The hearing has been moved up to 8 o'clock in the morning. Miles claimed it was an urgent matter of public safety." "Let's go," I said, standing up and smoothing my coat over my stomach. "He wants to play the worried husband. I am going to make sure he plays the defendant." I sat in the passenger seat of Eleanor's sedan, the engine idling 2 blocks away from the Gray Line headquarters. I opened my laptop and composed an email to Brielle. I attached a file named Port Authority Contract Final Annex, BPDF. It looked like the smoking gun document concerning the harbor deal, but it was a decoy. Embedded in the file header was a tracking pixel, a silent alarm that would tell me exactly when, where, and on what device it was opened. "Sent," I said, hitting enter. Subject line, I found this. "Is this why—" I watched the tracking dashboard. 4 minutes passed, then 7. At exactly 12 minutes past 7 in the morning, the tracker pinged. "Got him," I said, turning the screen to Eleanor. The file had been opened. The geolocation pin dropped directly on the federal courthouse. The device ID was listed as Chambers das iPad Euro 4. Brielle forwarded it immediately, Eleanor noted, putting the car in gear. "And Miles opened it on a government-issued device. He just received stolen property across state lines using federal equipment." We drove straight to Gray Line. The meeting with Human Resources was short and brutal. I did not apologize. I did not cry. I laid the printed access logs and the tracking report from the decoy file on the glass conference table. "I did not leak the client data," I told the HR director, keeping my voice level. "My credentials were stolen and used via a remote token that traces back to a federal judge's office. You are not investigating an employee leak. You are the victim of an external cyber attack." The director looked at the logs, her face paling as she realized the liability implications. We need to suspend the disciplinary action," she stammered. "We need to verify this." "You will do more than that," I said, sliding a formal notice across the table. "This is a demand for a litigation hold. You are legally required to preserve all server logs, email traffic, and access metadata related to my account and the Havenport project. If a single byte is deleted, I will sue this company for spoliation of evidence." By the time we left, Gray Line was in lockdown mode. They wouldn't fire me today. Outside, Rowan was waiting for us. He held up his tablet. "I pulled the security footage from the courthouse lobby," Rowan said. "Look who delivered the physical copy of the conservatorship petition to the clerk's office yesterday." I watched the grainy video. A woman in a trench coat handed a thick envelope to the clerk. It wasn't Brielle. It was Tiffany, Brielle's college roommate, the one who had been dodging debt collectors alongside her. "They are using a network of desperate people," I said. Then came the audio. Eleanor had sent the recording I made during the chaos at the restaurant to a forensic audio specialist. We played the isolated track of the whisper I had heard, right on script. Now, force her to sign. I had assumed it was Miles. But when the background noise was stripped away, the voice was higher. It was female. It is Brielle, I realized, a chill running down my spine. She said it to herself. She was coaching herself. Look at the frequency analysis, Eleanor pointed out, tapping the screen. The pitch has been digitally altered in the lower frequencies. If you play this raw, it sounds like Brielle, but if you play it on a low-quality device, like a phone speaker in a courtroom, it sounds like me. I finished her sentence, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. They planned to use this recording against me. They were going to claim I was muttering it to myself. That I staged the attack? It is a setup, Eleanor said grimly. They want to prove you are a danger to yourself. Then let's give them confidence, I said. File a preliminary motion. Mention the login logs, but leave out the tracking pixel, the video of Tiffany, and the audio analysis. Make it look like all I have is some circumstantial computer data. You want to bait them? Eleanor asked. I want them to think I am desperate, I replied. If they think I have no real proof, they will get sloppy. It worked faster than I expected. 30 minutes after Eleanor filed the weak motion, my phone pinged with a notification from the court docket. Miles's lawyer had filed a response. They submitted a new affidavit, a supplemental psychological evaluation from Dr. Thorne, claiming I had a history of hallucinations. I opened the document and zoomed in. In their haste to bury me, they had made a fatal error. The signature block for Dr. Thorne was dated October 31st. But the header of the clinic letterhead listed a board certification that the clinic didn't receive until November 15th. They forged it in a panic, I said, closing the laptop with a snap. They just handed us a felony. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the steps of the federal courthouse were already swarming with reporters. The local tabloids had run the headline, "Judge's Wife in Mental Crisis," just an hour before, a leak that could have only come from one source. Flashes popped like gunfire as I stepped out of Eleanor's car, but I did not cover my face. I did not give them the image of the fragile, broken woman Miles had paid for. I walked with my spine straight, my hand resting protectively over my stomach, and my face set in the blank, analytical expression I wore during high-stakes compliance audits. Inside courtroom 4, Miles was already seated at the plaintiff's table. He looked perfect. He wore a charcoal suit that was somber but authoritative, and his face was arranged into a mask of tortured concern. He did not look like a man who was about to strip his wife of her human rights. He looked like a saint bearing a terrible burden. "Your Honor," Miles said, his voice trembling with just the right amount of emotion. "This is the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I only want my wife to be safe. She is not herself." Judge Vance, a stern man who had known Miles for a decade, nodded sympathetically. The fix was in. The narrative was set. Then they called Brielle to the stand. My sister looked small in the witness box. She was wearing a modest dress I had never seen before, likely bought by Miles's team to make her look innocent. She cried on cue, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Evelyn has been having episodes?" Brielle sobbed, looking at the jury box even though there was no jury. "She thinks people are following her." That night at the restaurant, she grabbed my leg. She tried to hurt herself. I was just trying to stop her. It was a lie so bold it stole the air from the room. I felt a flash of heat in my chest, but I forced it down. In my line of work, emotion was noise. Data was signal. I did not sob. I did not shout. I simply opened my binder. "Ms. Voss," I whispered to Eleanor. "Execute Phase 1. Eleanor stood up. She did not argue with Brielle. Instead, she approached the bench with a single sheet of paper. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the theatrical atmosphere. "We are not here to debate feelings. We are here to examine the timeline. I present Exhibit A, the metadata from the psychological evaluation submitted by the petitioner." The screen in the courtroom flickered to life. It showed the digital signature of Dr. Thorne. "The evaluation is dated October 31st, Eleanor stated. However, according to the State Medical Board, the clinic on the letterhead did not receive its operating license until November 15th. It is impossible for this document to exist on the date it was signed. Judge Vance frowned. He looked at the paper, then at Miles. The sympathy in his eyes began to curdle into confusion. "Mr. Keaton," the judge said, "can you explain this discrepancy?" Miles stood up, smoothing his tie. "It must be a clerical error, Your Honor. The doctor is very busy." "Let us discuss clerical errors," I said, standing up before Miles could sit down. "Exhibit B." Eleanor flashed the next slide. It was the tracking log from the decoy file I had sent Brielle that morning. At 7:12 this morning, a file labeled Port Authority Contract was opened, I said, my voice projecting clearly. It was opened on a device with a MAC address registered to these very chambers. The file contained a tracking pixel. The user was not my sister. "It was someone inside the federal judiciary network." Miles froze. For the first time, the mask slipped. His eyes darted to his hands, then to the iPad sitting on the table in front of him. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. "This is irrelevant," Miles's lawyer snapped. "We are here to discuss Mrs. Keaton's mental state. We are discussing credibility," Eleanor countered. Then, Deputy Marshal Rowan Pike stepped forward from the back of the room. He walked to the bench and placed a sworn affidavit on the polished wood. "Your Honor," Rowan said, his voice deep and resonant. "I am submitting evidence regarding a key secure hardware token found on the respondent's laptop. This token is government property, assigned to Judge Miles Keaton, and was used to plant unauthorized files on a civilian device." The silence in the room was absolute. The reporters in the back row stopped scribbling. Judge Vance looked at the affidavit, then he looked at Miles. The look was no longer friendly. It was the look of a man realizing he was being dragged into a conspiracy. Judge Vance turned his gaze to Brielle, who was trembling in the witness chair. "Ms. Hart," the judge asked, his voice sharp, "you stated under oath that your sister attacked you, but this evidence suggests a coordinated effort to frame her. I am going to ask you one question, and I remind you that perjury carries a prison sentence of up to 5 years. Why did you kick your pregnant sister?" Brielle looked at me. Then she looked at Miles. Her face crumpled, the fear of prison outweighing her fear of debt. "Because he told," Brielle started, her voice shaking. "Because he said if I didn't." "Objection," Miles shouted, leaping to his feet. He knocked his chair over with a loud clatter. She is being coerced. This is ridiculous." He was shouting too loud. His face was red. He was not the concerned husband anymore. He was a terrified man trying to shout down the truth. And in doing so, he had just shown the entire room exactly who the dangerous one really was. Miles was still standing, his chest heaving, the echoes of his outburst bouncing off the mahogany walls. The courtroom was dead silent. I turned to Judge Vance, my expression unchanged. "Your Honor," I said softly, "I have one final exhibit. It is the unedited audio file from the night of the assault." I pressed the play button on the remote. The forensic filter was gone. The voice that filled the room was not high-pitched or feminine. It was a deep, familiar baritone that belonged to the man standing at the plaintiff's table. "Right on script. Now force her to sign." Miles slumped back into his chair. He looked like a man who had been shot. "Matches the timestamp on the hospital security footage," Eleanor said, her voice cutting like a scalpel. "At the exact moment that recording was made, The petitioner was placing the conservatorship documents into my client's purse while she was unconscious. The chain of custody is complete. This was a premeditated conspiracy to strip a competent woman of her rights. Judge Vance looked at Miles with a mixture of disgust and fury. He slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking like a whip. The petition for emergency conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice. The judge ruled, his voice booming. I am issuing an immediate protective order. Mr. Keaton, you are to have absolutely no contact with your wife. And frankly, I suggest you find criminal counsel. Rowan Pike stepped forward, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. We are way past suggestions. Your Honor, Rowan stated, as of this morning, this case has been referred to the Department of Justice. We have evidence of federal wire fraud, tampering with judicial records, and the use of government property to facilitate corporate espionage. Miles tried to speak, but no words came out. His mouth opened and closed, fish-like. And regarding the Havenport Harbor project, I added, looking directly at Miles. The Gray Line logs have been decrypted. We found the wash accounts. The $400 million meant for the city infrastructure has been traced to the shell companies listed in your name. The contractors are being subpoenaed as we speak. That was the final blow. The money was gone. The reputation was gone. Brielle let out a wail from the witness stand. She looked at Miles, realized he could no longer save her, and she broke. He bought my debt, Brielle screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. He promised me, if I just staged the scene, the debts would be gone. He said Evelyn wouldn't actually get hurt. He said she just needed to look. Crazy. The room erupted. Miles buried his face in his hands. Eleanor leaned over to me. We can push for maximum sentencing for her too. Assault and perjury. I looked at my sister. She was a mess. A pawn who had been played by a king. Destroying her would not make me safer. It would just make me cruel. No, I said firmly. I request that the court accept her confession in exchange for her full cooperation in the federal investigation against Miles Keaton. It was the ultimate revenge. I was not just defeating Miles, I was turning his own weapon against him. Brielle would spend every day of the next year testifying about every secret he had ever told her. The bailiffs moved in to escort Miles out. He looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading. But I looked through him as if he were a line of bad code that I had just deleted. I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp morning air. I placed my hand on my stomach. For the first time in 7 months, I took a breath that went all the way down to my lungs. I did not feel triumphant. I felt clean. The audit was finished. That night, I sat in my new apartment, the one Miles did not know about, and typed a final email to Eleanor. I am not asking for revenge. I am submitting evidence. I hit send. The game was over. I had cleared the board. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on the ending. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.